And today's sermon is really about the exciting showdown. You guys remember, like in almost every movie, there's this like, it always ends in like this exciting showdown at the end. You have all like the classic Clint Eastwood movies, like Make My Day and all, all that stuff. Like, but you think about even like the classic Christmas movie Die Hard, like ends with, no one laughed at that. All right. It ends with a great showdown between that one, the bad guy and Bruce Willis, like that's like, and you think about all like the Marvel movies, all the, all the superhero movies, they always end up in this great grand showdown. Almost every action movie has some kind of final showdown, right? That goes between that. And that's what's going on in our story today. It's like a great showdown of between God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob or Israel, and Baal or Baal, the god of rain and storms and fertility, right? Like it's kind of this showdown between the two of them is what it is. And most likely, if you know a story about Elijah, there's probably a good chance that it's this story today. It's this one. Some of you are going, I don't know what this story is. I've never heard it before. That's all right. I'll catch up. So let's just go back in time. So the northern kingdom of Israel has kind of started to worship Baal as well. This god of rain and storms and fertility has started to worship him kind of with Yahweh as well. And Ahab and Jezebel come onto the scene, and they kind of really amp up the worship of Baal over here. And when that happens, God sends his prophet Elijah. And Elijah comes onto the scene and basically looks at Ahab the king and says, by God's command, it's not going to rain for 3.5 years. Right? Like, oh goodness, right? Like 3.5 years, and then God tells Elijah, get out of there, he's going to kill you. And he goes out in the wilderness, and he ends up spending time with a widow and taking care of her and raising her son back to life. But that's last week's sermon. But for this week, we're at the end of that 3.5-year period, and we end up seeing a very troubling thing going on. Is that King Ahab has surrounded himself with all these yes men. He's surrounded by all these people that won't go against his will. In fact, when people do go against his will, he kills them. And if you read the story, we didn't read. There was actually more to the story, Jan, than what you read. Like, I'm just saying, I was doing everyone a favor, right? Like that's. But the beginning part of the story is he's killing all of these hundreds of prophets of Yahweh. He's killing all these hundreds of prophets of Yahweh because they're probably going against him, saying, hey, this Baal worship's getting out of hand, and they're bringing in more Baal prophets, more and more. So he's killing all these prophets of Yahweh. Now, something interesting happens here. And this happens a lot of times in the Hebrew Old Testament, and we have to pay attention to this when it happens. It'll position something, and then it'll have like the opposite right next to it. And it'll want us. It's almost like putting two things in front of you and going, do you see this? And the two things are, he's killing all these prophets of Yahweh. And then it does this turn, and you can read it later, but it does this turn where it says that Ahab then asked someone to go make sure the horses had water and food. You're like, what? Like you're reading it and you're like, what? Like, so he's killing all these prophets of Yahweh, and then he's like, oh, make sure the horses have water and food. And it's supposed to create like this dissonance in you, and you're like, wait a second, that seems weird, right? Does that seem weird to anyone else? Like, I think what it says is it's like Ahab doesn't care about the lives of his own people. The spiritual life of his own people, the physical lives of his own people, but he does care about the horses, right? He cares about horses, more than his own people. But in reality back then, what were horses? They were the tanks of the day, right? They were the tanks and the airplanes and the bombs and stuff like that. This is Bronze Age stuff, right? Like if you had horses, if you had like a cavalry, you win every battle right now, right? With your chariots and all those things. And so it's also, he's making sure, so he's killing off his own people, the prophets of Yahweh, but he's making sure his horses have water. It's kind of showing you who he is, right? And this isn't about the sermon, but I think we need to listen to those little lessons today, right? Who is willing to sacrifice their own so that they can amass more power? And that's an eternal message. That's not like, don't vote for this person or something like that. It's ridiculous. Because there's always going to be someone that's like that out in the world. And that could be even me, So we always have to watch out for that. But that's not really the point. And that's the whole yes men part of it. And we already discussed that. So he continues on. Now, how long has it not rained? How long is it? 3.5 years, right? It's probably pretty toasty outside, isn't it? Like we know what happens when somewhere that's used to getting rain doesn't get rain for a long time, right? And we have some very recent evidence of this, right? Like California, Australia right now, right? Where all of a sudden stuff can just go up super easy, right? Like it's not hard at all. Like think about how dry it was then. I remember one New Year's Day, we were shooting off fireworks because my last name is Escher, and that's what we do. And so it's a family thing. And we were shooting off fireworks, and it hadn't rained in a long time. And just like, when you shoot off fireworks, and just little tiny embers will come down. There had barely any power at all in them. They came and hit the ground, and it lit the grass on fire. And we had to go out there and stomp it out, and oh my goodness, because if we hadn't, I don't know what would have happened. We would have the great fires of Georgia, and it would have been my family's fault. That happens there. But man, when it's a tinderbox like that, almost anything can set it off. Much like my voice. I don't know what's going on Sundays. Honestly, I don't think I talk more than I do on a normal day on Sundays. You're laughing way too much at that, Joe. Like that. So the whole place is just a tinderbox, ready to go up. And I think that's a crucial detail that we should think about. It's just so dry and all that. It could just go up in flames. So after the 3.5 years are done, Elijah goes up to Ahab and Jezebel and is like, all right, it's time for the showdown. It's time for the showdown. Let's have you bring your God up to, we'll go meet at Baal Bluff. Now, it's not called Baal Bluff. That's what I'm calling it, right? It's called Mount Carmel. And Mount Carmel is this beautiful place. And it's this mountain right up against the Mediterranean, right up against the sea, and the water and and what happens there is that the hot, moist, super humid water that comes off the sea, comes up the side of the mountain, goes up into the stratosphere, and what happens then? Creates clouds, right? Creates clouds, and then the clouds come in. I remember being at Mount St. Helens a couple years ago. It's like 5 years ago now. Mount St. Helens, and there was always clouds around the top of it. Because it's this updraft around it, and it's creating clouds. That's just how convection works, right? And so they over there. So this Mount Carmel was an important place where they worshipped Baal or Baal, because he's the god of rain. And these people would see that right above that mountain is where the clouds always formed. Makes sense, right? So they go up there and they're like, this is where Baal lives. Right, this is where that God of rain lives over there. And there's also evidence when you read the story that there was an old altar to Yahweh on Mount Carmel too, but it was all beaten up and destroyed and broken, which is probably a good symbol of the state of faith in Israel at that time. So Elijah goes, let's go up to Baal Bluff, and we will have a great showdown up there. We'll bring 2 cows up there. You'll go first, and whoever can first bring fire from heaven down and scorch and take care of the sacrifice, burn up the sacrifice, wins in this great showdown. That's when the little detail about it being super dry is important, right? Because how many little fires did they maybe create by dragging stuff or something like that just behind them? Maybe they clink together 2 swords and it lights a field, like all that stuff. Like it's when things are dry, it's easy, right? Like so they go up there and they're like, all right, we'll do this. We'll do this great showdown between you. And here's where I want to introduce what the actual topic of the sermon is today. The main idea is humbly trusting in the one true God. And we have some subpoints here in a little bit, but that's kind of the main idea that we're going through, that humbly trusting in the one true God. So they get up to Baal Bluff, onto Mount Carmel, and there's all these prophets of Baal up there, along with Ahab and Jezebel. All these prophets up there, and they put the cow on the bull on the sacrificial fire, and they began to pray to Baal. So, what does all this sound like? Did any of you catch how many prophets of Baal are there? 450. There is 140 chairs in here. I believe there's 92 people in here, something like that right now. 92 people in that. So over 4 times the amount of people in here right now, all in this tight spot, all trying to pray to get Baal's attention. And it's probably, and if you can listen, kind of read between the lines in here, it's got to be loud. Like they're yelling and screaming and trying to all that because they're trying to say just the right thing so that they get Baal's attention, the God's attention. They're dancing around and doing all these things. They're probably got circles going around the altar and like all this is just wild scene, right? Just running around everywhere. And you can picture Elijah probably up against a stump, off to the side. And just watching all this is this is ridiculous. And he's watching this go on for hours, these guys over there. And then he starts to taunt them. And he taunts them and he's like, and our English translation cleans it up. Now, the English translation we read, it cleans it up just a little bit. At least it mentions it. But basically, he's like, well, why don't you guys be a little louder? Well, you need to be louder. I don't think he can hear you on his mountain here. I don't think he can hear you. It's maybe you need to be louder. Perhaps he's in the bathroom. That's why he hasn't heard you yet. That's what it says in there. That's cleaned up language, by the way. But if I said the real thing, you'd fire me. So, I can't read the Bible to you. So he starts taunting them, and when he starts taunting them, they're like, all right, it needs to go to the next level, and they begin cutting themselves, and it says that blood is going everywhere. They're desperately trying to get their God's attention, right? They're desperately trying to do that. And they finally finish after hours and hours and hours, and Elijah is like, all right, and he takes the altar and he repairs it with all this great symbolism he brings 12 stones, one for each of the tribe of Israel, and he puts a bull on it. And then he takes water. And he has them dump water all over the sacrifice. And he doesn't do that just once. He does it 3 times. Here's all this resurrection language here in the Old Testament, right? Where he soaks the sacrifice 3 times. So remember, the whole place is super dry. It's a tinderbox, and then the only place that's soaking wet is the sacrifice. You kind of getting the picture there? That's what he does. And then Elijah says this, from 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 36. And at that time of the offering of oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, or Jacob, let it be known this day that you are the God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me. When you see Lord all capitalized, that's the nice way of saying Yahweh. All right? Yahweh is supposed to be there. So answer me, O Yahweh, answer me, that this people may know that you, Yahweh, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of Yahweh fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood and the stones and the dust. It licked up the water that was in the trench. So it was all consumed, basically. Like the stones, the wood, everything was just all consumed. Like the water, everything. Everything was consumed in it. And then just after this mighty display, after this mighty winning showdown of Yahweh, just after this, Elijah prays 7 times, which is the completion, 7 times for rain to come. And rain comes over, a rain cloud begins forming in the sea, and it comes up, and it begins to rain. And I can only imagine that this is what Elijah does. He goes, ha ha! Ahab, you better hurry up and get on your chariot and get home, because it's raining so hard, all the rivers and roads may flood, and you may not be able to get there because of the rain. That's basically what he says, right? So it's a cool story. It's this showdown at battle at Baal Bluff, right? It's Baal's home turf on his mountain here, and God, Yahweh, wins the day. So what's the point? Like what's the point? Why in this? I think it has to do with this humbly trusting in the one true God. And there's 2 points. The second one is the one I really want you to pay attention to. But the first one is committed to one true God. So humbly trusting God, commit to the one true God, and then the second one is praying simple prayers. Basically, the committed to the one true God is there's that altar that's there that's in disrepair already, and I think it shows how Israel has gone after these other gods. It kind of shows in physical form the spiritual state of the people in that time. Now, I think a lot of times when we read the Old Testament, we can ask ourselves, what in the world? Why are these people going after these other gods? Don't they know they can just follow this one God? And we say that with a certain smugness that we're doing just fine the way we are right now, right? We've got no other gods that we deal with, right? And you're like, no, I feel like he's setting me up. Like that, I feel like he's setting me up. Listen, we could talk about gods forever that we have, but I like to pick on the easy ones because they're the low-hanging fruit. And it's election season, right? And none of us in this room have ever said anything to the amount of, we must elect this person because only they can save us. Yeah, some people are chuckling, right? Because that's a strong thing. Like you hear that language, or you hear that language coming out of these people that are elected, right? Or want to be elected. You hear that language that, only, you got to vote for me because only I can, only I can save it. And we put this almost messianic salvation role onto somebody that only they can do it. Like when you start looking at it that way and you begin to smell, you're like, oh, that smells like idolatry. Okay, I get it. Okay, like I smell it. I smell it there. There it is. There it is. It's sitting there right in front of me. And the thing is we willingly bow down to the nightly news and worship these figures that are going to save us. Right? And it's rough. And so you can see how it could happen to them because it so easily happens to us. It so easily happens to us. And you can look, let's see if I can step on any toes. All right? You can look throughout this country in many of our places of worship, and you can find objects of veneration that have nothing to do with the Bible, Jesus, God, or anything. And those objects of veneration, if we took them out, people would get upset and yell. I'm not going to say what those objects are. They're different and things like that. But they're all over the place. I'm sure we even have some in here too. But many of you know what I'm talking about. But we have these things, and you can see then how it can sleep in. And you're like, how could they worship Baal? Well, in 600 years, how can people look at us like, can you believe they had that in the church? You know? And I think that's where it takes us realizing that we need to be committed to the one true God. You know, that it's not something that it's like, oh, check, I've done that. It's looking at our lives and going, we're going there each and every day. Being committed is walking towards, because there's going to be new places where like, ooh, I wasn't doing that as good as I could have been, right? And going forward there. And so being committed there. Because the people of God fell away, and we can easily do that too. Now the second one, and it's much more fun than that one. That one is my phone's not working. Praying simple prayers. I think this is something Jesus talked about for a while, right? So he said something like, don't be like the hypocrites in the temple with their long flowing robes who like to be in front and hear people have their own voices heard. Wait a second. Right? They've already gotten their reward, right? Did you guys catch how long Elijah's prayer was? I read it all right here. Was it 20 seconds? Something like that? How long were the prophets of Baal's prayers? Hours, right? They're just going on and on and on and on and on. And I think sometimes we think that we have to pray like those prophets of Baal in order to get God's attention, like God's on the commode or something, right? Like if I just pray right enough, if I pray good enough, if I pray with the right intentions in mind, if I pray and all these things, then God will finally hear me and hear my prayer. And I don't think that. Like Elijah prays a simple prayer because he knows something. All these prophets of Baal are trying to get Baal's attention. Elijah doesn't have to get God's attention. He's already got it. God is right there. He's right there. And as Christians, we believe the angel that came to Joseph and said, his name's going to be Jesus, but we're going to call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So when we're praying, we don't have to pray this certain type of it's got to look just like this so that God will hear it and maybe hear my prayer. We know that God, by the Spirit, is with us already. And He hears even the utterances of our heart. We don't have to work and be perfect and make sure it's like, well, before I pray, I need to read 15 minutes of the Bible so God will hear me, right? We don't have to do cutting things like that in order for God to hear us. That God, we know, is right there. That His heartbeat moves with our heartbeat. And the breath of our lungs, Yahweh, Yahweh, is right there with us. So if you've ever felt like you don't know how to pray or don't know the words to say, God is right there with you. Just say it. You don't have to have a robe and be fancy and all that stuff. You can just say it. and he'll hear you, and he'll be with you. And when I was listening to this, I was like, man, that's good news. Man, that's good news, because that means I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be perfect. That God will still just listen to my prayers each and every day, because the perfection of Jesus was given to me when he died on the cross and rose again. And I think that's good news for all of us. And we'll end right there.